Now, Melanie, you just held up a mug, and I love mugs. Like, I love, love, love mugs. And it's a Fozzie the Bear mug, which makes it even better.
This is my favorite mug.
So,
I've had it for years.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I got a waka, waka, waka in my spirit.
It brings me great joy to drink out of this mug, but I am drinking strawberry matcha. Strawberry, I feel like it's just one of those official Black people fruit flavors. Like they just love it. I love strawberry. So the mix of matcha and strawberry just works for me today.
Okay. And that sounds fancy. So let's do some introductions. So Gio introduced herself, the Lux Libra. I am Malaika Salam, purple hair and Converse. Your hope dealer. Why? Because I'm pushing positivity constantly because hope is dope. That is my message for the people. And given what the headlines have been looking like recently, like more and more recently, right? I just feel like that is so necessary. And that is not to say that we are not going to come up against negativity and challenges. The power of positive thinking isn't that everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's realizing that when you get onto the other side of the storm, it's going to be clear. It's going to be dry. You're going to have a rainbow after the rain. And when you know that, you can approach life with the confident expectation that everything is going to work out exactly like it's supposed to. So that's me. And we got Melonee.
Oh, so is that my cue to introduce?
That was, wait. So I also, anytime that you're on like anything, hip hop lyrics start flooding my brain. And it always starts with check out my Melonee. So that's the segue. Check out my Melonee.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Melonee Gaines. I am based in Memphis, Tennessee. I am a writer. I am a journalist. I am a teacher, and I'm a mother. And I am here today to talk to the ladies of Chat with Aunties. And Gio is my grown-up friend. I tell everybody that. So Gio over there is my grown-up friend. We met in grad school and just instantly fell in love with her. I just thought that she was just like the dopest, most mature person. Because she'd be like, Melonee, you have to take care of yourself. Like she was the first person to ever really tell me that I need to take care of myself. And here I am like in my late 20s and somebody else is having to tell me that. So we have been friends ever since.
Yes, and it's been an awesome friendship. We've been through childbirth and work scenarios and travel scenarios and getting stranded in travel scenarios. Like we have literally done it all. Wifing, mothering, coupling, uncoupling, interventions and introductions and recommendations to return to your magic, just all of it. So it's been a fun ride, and I'm incredibly grateful for our friendship.
Yes, indeed, all of that. All right,
so let's get into it. We have spent the last month talking about vulnerability. Gio, what the heck is vulnerability? What is that even?
Look, have we gotten there yet?
Right.
Vulnerability is, so I mean, from what we've seen, from the work we've done, we have found that vulnerability is a mixture of honesty, our gentle, loving honesty. It is also includes care and compassion, care for ourselves, compassion for ourselves, and compassion for those around us. And it also includes being open, being receptive, being in a state of receiving, so that you can be on both the giving and receiving end of that compassion, of that care, of that honesty, and knowing that you are safe and supported in that. So that I think that's what we've come up with for vulnerability.
Right. And so one of the precursors to that is that you accept that vulnerability, when you are being vulnerable, that you are exposing yourself. And that along with that vulnerability, how you craft the spaces with the people who you feel comfortable being vulnerable with is accepting that there is a certain amount of acceptable exposure. So vulnerability by definition tells us that that you open yourself up to potential harm, which is why most people don't want to be vulnerable. Who volunteers to be hurt? Like, who signs up for that? But the reality is that sometimes that pain is a part of your growth, right? It's just like labor, and any labor intensive practice. It's not always going to be pleasurable on the front end. But if you avail yourself to it, if you say, I feel safe in this space, I accept this level of exposure, I know that with these people, although it may be painful, this is a safe place for me to experience that. Then we get into, the environment that's created for vulnerability. And that's kind of what we've been picking apart this month.
Mm-hmm. And I think if I could add to that, I think what is on the opposite end of that spectrum, because I think with anything, there's the spectrum or gradient that exists. And so when I think about vulnerability, I definitely think it's about exposing ourselves, but I see it as exposing the wounds that exist. So like if I was a flasher out there in the streets, like I'm out here flashing the wounds, like, hey, this is what's wrong.
Right.
This is what's going on with me. But I think at the same time, as a writer, we can't really dictate who our audience is. So we really put ourselves in a place of great vulnerability and not really knowing how people will accept our work, or even looking at if you're working with an editor and how the editor may take your work and make you go through several drafts and really challenge you as a writer to become better, whether it's in their vision or in the company's vision or in the publication's vision. So I think it's very difficult to kind of navigate those waters when you are a writer, because you're not sure how people are going to take it.
Right.
Are in their own healing and their own vulnerability. And even their willingness to see themselves in the very words that you share. Right. So I think all of that, seeing myself as a writer, I think it just comes with a unique challenge on that whole spectrum of vulnerability.
Yeah. And I definitely agree. And so I want to go back, because we talk about this all the time, and especially because writing, the importance of words and the importance of understanding words and the definition and the meaning. So vulnerability by definition is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Right. So it's not inherent that you're going to be attacked or harmed, but there is a possibility that that can happen. And so one of the things that we have just, gone over again and again, in different ways, in your family, in your institution, with your friends, what are the characteristics that you recognize? What are the things that you extract in these situations, to create safe space for yourself? So, we have to understand that it's the possibility. I think what gets us caught up, what has gotten me caught up, I'll use I statements. I've been caught up because the fear is very real that I will be attacked or harmed. So it goes from it being a possibility. A possibility means, it could happen, maybe, maybe not. But in my mind, there's a very real fear, right? That if I am vulnerable, that if I expose myself, it will happen. I will be harmed. I, will somehow be attacked physically or emotionally. And a lot of times emotionally, right? If I open up, then people are going to judge me and I feel attacked.
Right.
But that's not how it always is.
Yeah, that's the story of my life. A constant state of fear of being attacked. I don't want to move the conversation too soon if y'all don't want to. But I just know that growing up as a child of trauma, I grew up in a very physically abusive home. I think that informed everything, every encounter, every situation, every relationship. It just informed everything, because I literally was just out in the world afraid, first of all, that other people were like this. And secondly, that people would know that I've been through this. And so there was a lot of shame attached to being abused and watching my mother be abused and watch my brothers and sisters be abused. And so there was just a lot of that trauma that informed every thought that I had, because I literally thought that everybody was out to get me. But then when I went out into the world, I had this whole mask, and people were like, oh, you're so strong, you're so tough, you can't mess with Melonee, she will just let you know, she's so smart. But those were the things that protected me. So as long as I could be very put together, very smart, very articulate, nobody would notice the shame that I was carrying.
Yeah, Melanie, I was just going to hit on that before you said what you said, and ending what Malaika was saying about that fear being so real. And the fear is real because oftentimes we've had the experience, right? We've had the experience of being hurt, shamed, put down, blamed, whatever, around being vulnerable. So we learn how to just close up, right? We learn that vulnerability is not safe. And it often, sometimes some of us are incredibly blessed and fortunate to find what we now call safe spaces, but what I think of and what's really been on my heart a lot this week is thinking about our elders, and for some of us, it may be an older auntie or a grandparent, somebody that we identify as a safe person, who we can be vulnerable with. But even that is very limited because they can't go everywhere with us. They can't protect us everywhere. They can't be whispering in our ear all the time to make sure that we still feel safe out in the world. So I definitely wanted to touch on that, how we often find safe people or we find safe places, but we really still are, needing to feel safe in general in the world, or feel safe, in our bodies, or feel safe as we carry ourselves. So I just wanted to touch on that's very real, and part of that vulnerability, and part of what we seek, and part of the reason why we're even doing this show, this broadcast, is because we want to have that conversation. We want to create more safe spaces. We want to create more safe people by creating, a place for people to be healthy. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Malaika, about that fear. And then Melonee, you wrapped that up really well with, talking about how real it is, right? We're not just being fearful because we're paranoid, anxiety riddled people. We're being fearful because we've had very real experiences that were traumatic, and we're still, living through that, or we're still trying to recover from that, or we're still trying to navigate the world having had those fears be made real.
Exactly. And like even in one of the books that I've read by Thomas More, he's one of my favorite philosophers, definitely talks about the soul in ways that I have never read by any other author. But one of the points that he makes consistently is that we are never fully healed. And I think me and you talked about this on a phone conversation, is that we are never fully, completely healed. All we can really do is honor our soul and not try to escape through our spirit, which I thought was like, boom, this is kind of like, well, what does that really mean? And I think a lot of people associate the soul and the spirit as one and the same, but they are definitely in relation with each other. The soul is here to learn the lesson. The spirit is to help us transcend. And so we literally have to live this life in tension, holding on to both strings of those, just trying to make it through. And sometimes we want to escape through the spirit, and sometimes we want to sit in all of our mess in our soul. And we have to learn that there is balance between the two. And I think that's what we'll have to work through for the rest of our lives until we leave here.
So Gio and I have also definitely had that discussion about what healing looks like. And so, people talk about all the time, the work, the work, the work. And people get really frustrated with the work and doing the work, right? And they're like, when does this ever end? It's a process. And you might be working on the same thing and have to go through 7 different levels of that one thing. And that doesn't mean that it's completely healed. Like, even I look at it this way. You still have that scar, right?
Right.
So it's the difference between healing from the wound and healing from the scar. It can be sutured, it can be cauterized, it can be cleaned out. Like, all of those things will happen as part of the healing process. That does not mean the wound didn't happen. The wound did happen. Now, is the wound still open, or have you had an opportunity to do the healing work so that the wound is closed? And now you can heal. Now you can, do work from the wound, from the closed wound, right? From the
Right.
healing. And so I think it's important. Two things that you said. One, So Gio, you were saying how fear drives us. And so Melanie, I definitely understand. I also grew up in an abusive family, where people were physically violent. And so that very much shaped who I was as a young person and wanting to, minimize anything that would upset anybody enough for them to be violent.
Mhm.
So, a lot of me giving and accepting things was about just being the peacemaker, just not, wanting to be easy, wanting to not incite any anger in anybody. And
Right.
that fear definitely drove me because I was afraid of what somebody's response would be. The other thing that Gio said that I think is super important is about creating safe people, right? So when we open up these spaces where we can have these discussions, where we can talk about stuff honestly, this takes me back to the first vulnerability conversation that we had, where I made the connection with, oh, Maya Angelou went from being Marguerite
Right.
in Stamps, Arkansas, to being Maya Angelou because she was not afraid to speak her truth about all of her experiences.
Mhm.
And that was a very hard thing because there is a lot of shame, there is a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of things that were out of my control as a child. There, I got to a point where it was like, okay, so this part of the wound I'm clear on. I did not have control in this situation. I didn't do anything to bring this on. This happened as a result of those people and what their lived experiences and what they were dealing with. But as an adult, so I healed that child part, right? Okay, I'm not responsible for that. But as an adult, I was still caught up in the pattern. And I was still being driven by fear and still doing things that were of my own doing. So there was a lot more shame and embarrassment because, oh, I did this. And I didn't understand how that connected to the fear for a long time. I didn't
Right.
understand how suppressing things and not, talking about them and not exposing myself because of that shame continued to, exacerbate the pattern.
Right. And I think what's interesting in all of that, I remember that episode where y'all talked about Maya Angelou, and I was like, yes, Lord, because you were just talking about how she was just in her mess and how, she just up and left her child, just kind of like, look, I got to come back at some point. And I think in all of that, in women like that I honor, because I'm definitely a reader. So when I think about people like Maya Angelou or Nikki Giovanni or Sonia Sanchez, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, these are the mothers that I seek when I need that wisdom because they've lived it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think even seeing myself as a writer and kind of sharing my own story, I had to get to a place where I could no longer be ashamed of that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where it begins when you're able to share your story and not even just kind of relish in the fact of, oh, I got over that, but it's kind of like I constantly learn from that. And I
Yeah.
think the power in all of that is that you can become the writer of your own myth in some type of way, and not necessarily a fictional myth, but every story is based in some type of truth. And when those stories are passed down, they inform us in terms of where our healing is, who we are, how we identify in the world with other people, how we connect, and all of that. And so, I mean, I'm 39 now, but I was probably about 35, 36 when I could finally tell other people I grew up in a physically abusive home.
Yeah.
It took me that long to actually say I was abused. So
Yeah.
now you know what's wrong with me. So it's just kind of like, I just kind of got to a point of not necessarily saying that this is what's wrong with me, but this should shed some light in terms of how I'm connecting with you.
Right. How I got
Yeah,
to be who I am. And I think
right.
that's so important because really part of the fear of exposure and part of the shame is that the world really does tell us there's something wrong with you.
Right.
And so so that adds to the shame, right? Because now I'm processing this through, if I tell you this, then you are now going to say, oh, well, that's what's wrong with you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I get it. Like, you were abused. So of course you turned out this way. And it's like, no, that's a part of it,
Right.
but there's nothing wrong with me. That's part of who shaped me and
Mm-hmm.
what shaped me into who I am now. And now in this space, I recognize that and I do the work. I wouldn't be doing healing work for women if it hadn't been through the stuff that I wouldn't be doing it in the same way. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? Like, I think our purpose is our purpose, and we came here and there was already things that we were destined to do, but I would not be doing it I don't think I would be doing it in the same way if I had not had the experiences that I had.
Exactly. And I think even for a long time, I tried to run away from being a teacher. So, I've been a teacher for a number of years, and I've worked in predominantly Black, high poverty areas here in Memphis. And I just feel like at the end of the day, it's a calling on God, from God, to work in those communities. But at the same time, I walk in, with my hair, got my little bronzer, my little lipstick, my cute little clothes, and the kids automatically assume several different things about me because they feel like you're not one of us, you don't know what I've been through and all that kind of stuff. And it really takes a person with deep compassion and a story of connection and not judgment in order to be able to teach them babies. At the end of the day, I'm not there to, save them, but I'm there to teach them. But in order to teach, I have to be able to connect. And so when some of them come in there with a story of like, well, I've been through this and you don't know what I've been through. Like, look, you can sit on that sob story all you want to, but I was homeless at 16. So just like you're homeless, you can't use it as an excuse to give up or treat people this way. If I had somebody to tell me that at 16, I literally had to tumble through life because I didn't have nobody to stop and say, I know what you're going through. Because I never gave them the opportunity to do so. I was closed off from telling anybody what was going on with me. So to literally be on my own in this world since I was 16, and I'm here. Yeah. And sometimes I wonder how I'm here. But I literally, and I wrote this in my journal, and I'm writing this in another piece that I'm doing, but I literally had to make the choice to want to live. I remember that day where I was just bottomed out completely. And I was just talking to God, and I just said, but through it all, I still want to live. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's the calling on my life, but I literally just wanted to live. But I needed something to kind of appease whatever hurt and all those challenges that I had just kind of accumulated for years. Yeah. I just had to make a choice to live. Period. The end.
I love that. I love that, making a choice to live, because it is a choice, right? It is, at a certain point, especially if you've been hurt, if you've been damaged, if you've been faced with things that you have survived, versus living, and thriving. And that is very much an intentional process because you go through the process of building a life. And Melonee, I remember when our friendship went from this book is great and we're going to talk about fancy Black lady, Black literature to now it's getting real and we're going to talk about us as Black ladies and Black stuff. Yeah. So like, I remember that turning point, where we went from scholar friends to friends. Mm-hmm. And, just learning, your story and learning about your experiences. And, I had so much admiration for that. And I saw that like, oh, this woman lives intentionally. Like Melonee sees what she wants and she says, I'm going that way, because that is where the bigger living is. That is where, the openness so that I can breathe, right? That is where I can receive. That is the space that I want to go towards. And so I think it's very much intentional. And, I think we have to talk about that, especially considering the events of the last 2 weeks, right? With these major celebrities making the decision, whatever, we're outside of whatever influenced those decisions, but at some point making a very intentional decision to not be here anymore. That it is very much intentional and it is very much a decision, and it's a consistent decision because every day you're making decisions, not just to live, but how to live. Right. And then we get to the healing part where we say how to live better, how to live more wholly. And that was a post that I put up a few days ago, like healing is just being made whole again. It's just being made complete. And that is the work that we're doing. Like, we are here to put the pieces together, new pieces, old pieces, better pieces, stronger pieces, whatever is missing. Like, we're here to put those pieces back together so that we can keep going towards that thriving, so that we can continue going towards Malaika's word, flourishing, so that we can continue living, right? And so we're so fortunate, I think, to live in a time like now where we can connect with other human beings. I was talking to a woman earlier today, and she was just like, "Oh, I really wish that." She was talking about how she didn't like going to healing spaces or retreat spaces and being the only Black woman there. And I was like, well, let me introduce you to some healing spaces and retreat spaces where Black women are, and where they are thriving, and where they are flourishing, and where they are able to do this work. So, like, we're really fortunate to live in a space and a time and have access to resources that can really help us with the healing work, that can help us find the pieces that we need to be made whole, and that we can connect to other people while doing that work. So, I mean, that's
from a very realistic grassroots perspective, it's not always easy to connect. And I think for the number of years that I've worked with traumatized communities, I even, I worked in New Orleans for several years after Katrina. And so looking at that level of outreach with, that particular traumatized community, as far as what they were going through after a natural disaster, and even working in communities in Memphis, you can say that you want help or that you want healing, but then at the same time, you can turn your nose up at that because you have literally been trained to believe that that's not for you, that your value is not enough to want to say, well, let me go over here with these people look like they doing something, look like they over here crying and hugging and loving, but then they can say the same thing about themselves, like, but I don't deserve the hugging. I don't deserve to cry. I need to sit over here and suffer, and everybody is going to pay for what has happened to me. I mean, that's literally the narrative that is driving their unconscious, their unconscious mind. And so it's not that they're making a conscious decision to do it, but when you have been traumatized to the point to where you have literally been broken by it, it is very difficult to believe that you deserve some healing. Very difficult. I have literally had a student to fight me because I wanted to hug him after his mother was shot and was killed. Don't fucking hug me. Don't touch me. Like, what is that? What is that?
Yeah. I'm glad you
find the time and the space to be able to reach in. And that is some very difficult work to do. Very difficult work to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think about the book, The Courage to Heal. And that's what it is, right? You have to be brave enough to say, you know what, they got what I want over there, and I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to go see what that's all about. I'm going to go get some more information about that. So yeah, it definitely is a process that you have to be brave enough to do it, because the other part of it is, well, I'm over here sick and hurt and damaged, but I'm over here with the people that I know who are also sick and hurt and damaged. And if I go to the healing place, I'm not going to be with the people I know anymore. I don't know those people. I'm going to be with strangers.
Are unfamiliar to me. They're talking differently. They feel different. They're treating me differently. And I would have students tell me all the time, you act white. Why you always want to do like, this ain't got nothing to do with acting white. Even the idea of being vulnerable and loving was a very foreign concept to them. And I mean, it's literally like day to day having to be consistent. Like, this is me. I'm gonna love you at the end of the day. So it's just like, go on with that, Miss Gang. But then after a while, I'll be like, can I get a hug, Miss Gang? I'm good for it. So it's a process. But I love those babies.
I think it's so important though. Like, what I heard you say that resonated with me very clearly, like, it was a word. They don't feel like they deserve it. We've been told we don't deserve it. We've been told that Black people don't go to counseling. My father was a counselor for years, but would not go to counselors, didn't want us going to counselors, didn't want us to be labeled. And I was like, well, how do you work in this institution? And he's like, well, I understand how the institution works, and I'm just trying to save y'all from it. But the reality is, there was still that part of him that was very steeped in a culture of this ain't what Black people do.
Right.
This is not what we do as Indigenous people, which is not true. We don't do it in the same way, right? So we're so far separated from the way that things were done in our original communities and villages and tribes that we're having all of these identity crises and trying to figure out, where do I fit and how do I fit and how can I do this? And so it's very much the same thing with you talk white and you act white and you eat white foods, because those things were not accessible to us. And we were told that those were not our things and that we didn't deserve those things. So we're only seeing the byproduct of that. And so, yeah, the same way that it was programmed into us, it takes consistent action over a period of time for us to start to, be reprogrammed, for us to rewrite that program.
And I think media has a lot to do with it, because if I don't see people that look like me and living like me being able to have the space to heal on the television or on an album or in this video that I'm watching, they don't have those examples. And so when we're talking about value, which is so important, especially when you're talking about traumatized communities that are in high poverty areas, a lot of the values that we want to try to place on them is not even part of their development.
Right.
Because you've already been shoved into a space where you think, well, you need to live in this blighted housing, or you need to live in this food desert, or you need to live in this under-resourced community. And so we're going to close all of your community centers, and we're going to shut down your bus stops and take away your jobs and all that. That has an impact on your value system, and you literally have to use what's available to you.
Right.
It's not much at all. So it's literally like you're going out into life completely under-resourced. You say you want me to be successful, but you're sending me out here with a bounce check.
Right.
I have nothing to pull from. And so literally you have people that are in these communities working, and we're pouring into people, but at the same time, there are holes, at the bottom of it, and it's kind of seeping out.
Yeah. So the other part of that, Gio, you said, there are people who see what's over there, and the courage of healing is having the courage to go over there to that foreign place with those different people. Sometimes I think, though, and I haven't read the book, but I would say that the first step, there's always a first step, right? And so that can be a really big jump, going from what's familiar and the people who are familiar and who speak the same language to this foreign place. Even if your healing is over there, sometimes you have to recognize that what's going on around you isn't working. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's the first step. Like, oh, I'm unhealthy, and I now recognize that I'm unhealthy, and I recognize the people around me who are unhealthy, and so therefore they don't have the tools or maybe the capacity to help me to heal and to become whole again. And then you can start to search outside of that immediate surrounding. And ladies, feel free to jump in. This is not just a three-way conversation. It's a community roundtable discussion. So feel free to add your input and your insight as things are coming up for you as well.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to add to that is that my work as a journalist. So over the last year, I was able to work with MLK50.com, which was a justice through journalism project. And it was helmed by Wendy Thomas, who is this very lauded African-American female journalist here in Memphis. And so being a part of that team and having to go into communities that were literally just bare to the bone and having to write about those stories in a lot of ways was a very lived experience for me, to where it really felt like it added to my own trauma. It added to my own pain, because it literally leaves you feeling very helpless. So I'm reporting on it and I'm sending it out into the world, hoping that somebody can do something about it. Yet there are so many structures and systems that are in this world that keep it that way. And one of the things that Wendy Thomas used to tell us all the time in our editorial meetings is that poverty is the name of the game because people profit from it. Mm-hmm. It's always people that probably, she said, poverty is a big business and there's always someone that's profiting from it. And I'm just like, we see it everywhere. And it's just, like, what can you do with that? And so literally by the time the project was over, mid-April, I was drained and I felt like I could not write anymore. Like I had to kind of like take a month and a half, 2-month hiatus from that. But I think one of my questions that I want to bring to you today is just, how do we deal with the fact that there are so many structures and systems in place to keep people away from their healing? What can we do with that? And so that's something that I always kind of think about. And I think the best answer that I've come up for myself is that it's literally a one-to-one relationship. I can only impact people one person at a time, and not necessarily say, I'm going to save this community today. Like, I don't think it really works that way.
Melanie, I'm glad you posed that question. I was at a policy conference about health and health equity last week. So part of the work that we did was really looking at what are the challenges around health, and what do we do, or what can we do policy wise to impact the most people in the most beneficial way. And so the group that I was in, we worked specifically on rural healthcare, and literally one of the components that we included in that transforming care for rural Americans was, well, rural communities was, what would it look like to have community centers, healing spaces that offered alternative modalities of healing, that offered just opportunities for healing, because so many rural communities don't have any resources. And when I think of inner city impoverished communities, it's the same thing. They're separated from the resources, like you were talking about, these food deserts and things like that. And so one of the things that we included policy-wise in that was to actually have people available in those communities to provide the services that they actually need, right? The counseling services, the group therapy services, those kinds of things. And then at the other end of that spectrum, I'm thinking about last summer, I was at an event and I met a bunch of alternative practitioners. So one woman, she practiced it's EMDR, and it's like eye movement. And I can't remember the other two pieces. I'll find the full name of it. But it's this alternative modality where you can help people work on their trauma using physical activities. And eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Mm-hmm. I've actually had EMDR.
Okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So one of the practitioners was talking about, like, she was really committed, and she's, looking at the same thing that you're looking at, these that have been cut off from so many resources. And she was a middle-aged white woman, but she really wanted to bring the benefits of EMDR to inner city kids in Philadelphia, because that's where she was. She was in Philadelphia. She knew that the kids in these impoverished communities, in communities that had been affected by trauma, could benefit from the practice. And so she literally created this program where EMDR practitioners could go into different schools once a week and work with students, to help them process their trauma using this technique. And she was talking about how, one student was just like, why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here doing this? And a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. And the piece that I took away from that was, we have to have healers in our community. Mm-hmm. Right. We have to have people. And that was what she was talking to me specifically about. Like, how do I get more African-American counselors, into training for EMDR so that they can deliver care in their own communities? And so when you were talking about, that's a white thing, or, healing is over there for white people. And like Malaika said, you're eating white food and it's all couched in race. And we have to think about that as really it being couched in inequality of resources. Mm-hmm. Inequality of access. That's what this country is built on. It's built on that inequality. So if we look at it in those terms, like, it's really about inequality of resources and inequality of access. How can we increase access and, have more people who are licensed, certified, able to offer the care that's necessary. And then two, able to, offer it to the people in the communities where it's most needed. And I think, there are some community-based models like the one, we thought about as far as having people in those communities. There's the other model of training people to deliver that care. And then even one of the models that I've seen Malaika participate in, like actually having intentional communities where you can practice that kind of care. So I think, like everything else, we have to save ourselves. One of my favorite hashtags from you is always "we all we got." So it's like, we have to, we have to be the ones going into those communities and doing that kind of work, and I remember just having that experience myself when I did my yoga teacher training. Like, I was the first Black student that my teachers had, and they were so happy because they were like, oh, we really want to make sure that yoga is accessible to Black communities. And so, they were just super excited and, made sure that I was able to complete the program and do everything that they could to help me. But I think that's where it starts. Like, we have to be ready to give that care. We have to be ready to facilitate that healing, which also gets us back to we have to do our own work, and we have to make sure we've done our work so that we can be ready to go in and do that work that you're talking about, like working with a person one-to-one, or, in a class or something like that, working with a person one to a group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, leading by example, how we wind up in this space, creating what we need. My work is very much a result of, there were things that I needed, and when I didn't see them out there, I just started creating them for myself. And I was like talking to my friends, hey guys, chat with the aunties was literally me having a conversation about self-esteem with Giovanni, having a conversation about self-esteem with my daughter, having a conversation about self-esteem with the spiritual teacher. And I was like, listen, we're having all of these conversations all over the place. Let's center it. Let's make a place, because if we're having these conversations with several different people, they are also probably having those conversations with several different people. Let's center it. Let's give them a place where they can come and talk about it.
Right.
Like, let's put it out in the open. And I think that's the other part of it, is that, we've got to be willing to talk about this openly. And so this gets us back to vulnerability, because it's one thing to have a chat with the aunties when it's me and you and Gio in private, sipping tea, not talking about our business to everybody in the public and on YouTube and Instagram, right? That's a lot safer environment. That's a container, right? When this goes out, who knows what people's reactions are going to be? There's a possibility that we could have some, pushback.
Right.
But I'm more concerned about being honest and doing the healing work than I am about the pushback. Like, I just reached that point where it was like, you know what? My healing is way too important to worry about if it makes people uncomfortable anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I think one of the biggest roles in my life is really being a teacher. I think, writer, all that kind of stuff. I think teacher is just a very prominent part of my life. And so to be an English teacher and to work with my students with the written word and kind of look at it from a very socio-political, historical context, and just making it very relatable, to their lives. Like, I can teach them the life of Bath from the Canterbury Tales, and we can have a whole lesson about rape culture and how that informs all of your relationships. So when I see girls allowing certain things to happen to them, it's because nobody ever taught them boundaries. And so we can use that story to kind of talk about boundaries and this whole, culture, that is based on misogyny and patriarchy and whiteness as well. And so I think for me to be able to get students to understand those texts, and then to be able to write about them, and then have opportunities to write about themselves in different forms, has allowed a huge amount of vulnerability just in my classroom. Mm-hmm. And so I think being able to use my own skill set as a writer in the classroom to even understand my process of vulnerability and being able to teach other students that, I think it does something for me. I think when I see other people step into their vulnerability, it allows me to become more vulnerable and assist me in my own healing, because now we're in this space together. So whether it's in that container in our little group chat or in this classroom, it's still got to be a safe space. And so that classroom has to be a safe space. So I set my boundaries. I'm like, and we're not going to laugh. We're not going to do this. We're not going to check. And I allow students to be free. And what goes on in that classroom stays in that classroom.
Right.
That's something that I've always honored with my students. And that's something that they've always respected.
And so really you've answered your own question, right? This happens through intentional relationships.
Right.
And this happens through, the methods that we've said, how do we come to a place as individuals in organizations? What characteristics do we bring to a space that makes it safe or makes it sacred or makes it a healing space? It's being very deliberate about, okay, this is a space that I want to work in. These are the people that I am working with. These are the things that I need to put in place for us to be able to do that. And so if even one of your students leaves that space and after, being resistant and pushing back, if they come to you at the end of that and say, I want a hug, then you've done what you needed to do for that one student. And that one student will carry that out into the world. So no, we may not be able to go into a whole community and plant a garden and put up apartments and, do all of the things that need to be done.
Yeah, look what we did.
Right. We made a safety village. We may not be able to do all of that work ourselves. And that is one of the biggest pieces that I have had to learn. And I've been reading Emergent Strategy, very slowly, very deliberately, just ingesting it and realizing I was so mad about what they did with the Sears Tower. I was so mad because I was like, that could have been some really intentional housing. We've got such a bad homeless problem in Memphis. They could have had community gardens. They could have had, the part of me that is very much altruistic and lofty ideals. I'm like, there's a way that this could have been done and we could have saved all of these people. But ultimately I realized I can't build the apartment. I can't do the garden. I can't do the spiritual teaching. And I just can't do all of the things. And that is okay, because there are all of us out here who have gifts and who have skills and who have purpose that, each of us can bring that to the table.
Right.
So when we sit down, we have chat with the aunties, we're able to say, okay, so in the classroom, this is a way that you are affecting those people. This is a way that you are affecting, and really future leaders. When you said you ran from teaching, I can relate. I can relate.
You're right, by the way.
Yeah, same. And trying to come to terms with what that looks like, because I have always been an educator for as long as I can remember. And I'm just I had a traumatic experience with an administrator and I didn't like the way the institution was. So the rebel in me was we're going to work outside of the system. We're going to start a homeschool co-op. We're going to do all of those things. And that was great. And I definitely saw the benefits of doing that work. And now I'm back in schools subbing and testing out the water. But as soon as I got back in there, I was like, oh yeah, I love this. I have a heart for this. I want to be here. I want to have these conversations. I want to show them something different. So each of us has to figure out, what is the thing that we bring to the table? What is the area that we affect? That's how you do it. That's how you affect change.
I think that as with all things, they evolve. And I'm going to bring this full circle. So grab a hold real quick. So I think when we talk about teaching, it has evolved just like how other people's coping skills. I remember earlier we were talking about, we can't really go to the elders because even in their healing spaces or just where they are with their vulnerability, they don't have the same tools and resources that we have today to deal with some of these very social, emotional things that we're going through. So even when I think about some of the times where I would want to go to my mom to talk about certain things, I'm like, I don't really feel comfortable having this very fear-based driven conversation with my mother because that's the space that she's in. There are times that she comes through and she just really blesses me with something, but because of where my mother is with her healing and just from what generation she is from, I can't always depend on that elder wisdom consistently.
Right.
And so even when we look at when we were in school as children, I grew up in the same neighborhood as my teachers. So if there was anything that happened at school or needed to happen, we had community that surrounded that. Now today we have teachers that don't live in the same communities as the children that they live with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about these spaces of how we want to redevelop and heal and help these communities, but we're so disconnected from it. And I mean, there is a blessing for every teacher that decides to go into the classroom. But I think with the evolution of that particular career, I don't think it's meant to be as long as it used to be. I mean, there are people that were in it for 40, 50 years and they retired out of it. I feel like after a while, you kind of tap out after 5 years, you have to move on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
The evolution of you being a teacher can come in different forms, but I think being in the classroom and the politics that surrounds the classrooms, it doesn't allow a certain level of vulnerability that communities need in order to connect.
Yeah, I hear that. And so that ties, again, it ties back into the work. Every piece of work that I'm doing, when I look at it now, I'm like, this is all tied to some need that I saw.
Right.
I am still not at the place where I want to go into one school full time and be a classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I am very much enjoying long-term assignments in intensive reading and intensive math and having conversations with those children. Because when I step into the classroom, the first thing they say is, you know, you got the dumb class, right? You know, we slow, right?
Right.
So really taking my time before we get into any lessons to talk about, you know, what are the rules of engagement? The rules of engagement, I don't believe that. So we're not going to say that. Let's talk about some other ways that we can address this. Let's talk about the strengths that you have. Let's talk about what the challenges are so we can work on those challenges. But we're just not going to give a blanket, this is the slow class.
Right.
But you know, that is part of what I enjoy, is going into those challenging environments that other people don't want to go into. And so I'm still, you know, figuring that part out. And then the other part of that is I realize they're not getting everything that they need in those schools.
Right.
So what do we work on outside of the schools? Programming.
Right.
Okay, well, bet your school isn't going to give this to you. Don't worry about it. We got a program for that. And we'll bring it to your community center, and we'll bring it to your principal, and we'll take it to all of the spaces that you exist. And we know where those spaces are because we've been there.
Right. Right. Yeah, I feel all of that. And I think, you know, I have 7 years in the game as far as secondary education, 14 altogether with higher ed. And I am, just like with my whole life is evolving. And I think transition is okay. I think for a number of years, I lived with a lot of guilt of like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and leave teaching. But then at the same time, I'm like, I'm leaving my babies behind. I'm leaving these communities that I care deeply about. And you said a word where you said where you have these schools that don't have everything that you need. And then we bring everything that we have and we leave that job feeling depleted. And so it's a very vicious cycle. So how can I really feed myself where at the same time I'm being very vulnerable in this space, because it's not easy working with some of these children. And it leaves you definitely wanting to desire more. And so that's that push and pull with the soul and the spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I definitely would like to talk about my book chapter.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what I was going to say. Fortunately, this platform allows us a little bit more time. Unlike Instagram, it's not going to be rude and just put us out at the 1 hour mark. So we do have a little bit of time. Gio, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just thinking, you know, again, one of the things that I keep hearing Melonee say is about creating these safe spaces. So, Melonee, when you were talking about your classroom and, you know, the rules of engagement and, you know, what stays in here versus what goes out, you know, like all of that is a real practice in creating a safe space. So, and then, you know, thinking about how we come into spaces and make that work, and bring what people need, you know, and creating those safe spaces is a major part of that, and showing what that looks like, right? A safe space doesn't have to be us in the woods in a retreat, you know,
Right.
20 miles away from civilization. It can be right here in this room as long as we are all in agreement on what that looks like and on making that space a safe space. And then, again, you also have to deal with that being a foreign concept to many people, right? So to many people, regular behavior never turns off. So there's never, like I heard you say, like, we're not going to check, we're not going to laugh. And it's like, well, some of these kids checking is 24/7. It doesn't matter. You can get checked anytime, any place.
My students, not in my classroom. So I shuts it down because they know I back and they know I go for the jugular. So they don't have, because they were like, you always want to get the last word is. So it's just like, I'm just like, I'm the queen bee when it comes to that. They don't want to come up against the queen bee.
So yeah, like being able to set those boundaries and create that safe space is a huge skill set. Like that's a big skill set, right? Everybody doesn't have that skill set. So that's a huge skill set that then allows people to go into doing the work that they need to do, knowing like Miss Gaines is not gonna play. She is going to make sure that I'm safe, that I'm okay, that nobody's going to say nothing sideways to me, that I'm protected. So I can say blah, blah, blah that I need to say, that I need to get out.
And
so I just wanted to.
I've had instances where I have heard about a student had left class and was messing with somebody. And I have literally left my classroom to go find that student and to let them know, wait a minute, what was our agreement in class with the rules and what we're going to do with this lesson? So, I will just dress them all the way down in front of their friends. Another teacher be like, yeah, we're going to set this straight because this is not what we're going to do. But if they've never been taught those skills of what it means to be discreet and honorable, all those things that we value in different communities, and we have to be able to teach that to others. Like, this is not what you're going to do. So if you're used to being violated and criticized and nobody ever corrects that, you come to believe that that is okay. It's learned behavior, and that's just not what we're going to do up in here.
Right. It's the norm. Again, whatever you're doing when the people around you are doing the same thing, it's the norm. So until you are put in a position to question that, until somebody comes in your life that helps you to take a look at that, that's what you do. We do it because this is the way that it's always been done.
Right.
So, fortunately,
and you can probably agree. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you probably agree with this. With growing up in an abusive household, you come to start to believe that this is okay behavior. So punching walls, beating somebody down, and all that kind of stuff, that's okay. But I think one of the things, I was a rageaholic for years. So let's just not believe that I just walk out of the house completely okay. But I was a rageaholic for years. But I think going into my marriage, it definitely taught me, when he saw me kind of like rage out one time, he was like, no, this ain't what we gonna do. Like, and this is like probably like day one of like our marriage. He was like, no, this is not okay. Like, what are you doing? And so that was my first instance of somebody kind of letting me know that your unchecked rage is not okay. Right. And what really helped evolve that was the birth of my child. Because I was like, I don't want her to grow up in a house like I did, or grow up with someone like my father. So it definitely made me become more intentional about who I was going to be in this world. I was definitely afraid of being like my father. I did not want my daughter to ever experience that.
And I definitely can relate to that. Like, I've been there, and I tell the story, like, I was one of those parents who used physical punishment when my children were little. And one time I was in the midst of whipping my daughter and like pulled my hand back, hit it on the windows, on the door jamb, and that stopped me, because I realized that if that lick had landed, it was going to be a bad one. And I immediately dropped the belt and called my dad and was like, listen, you taught me this. You taught me that we whip our children and that that's how we get them to, behave and listen and do what they're supposed to do. And this is not working. You hurt me. I was getting ready to hurt my daughter, and I need a new way. So fix it. You broke it. You fix it. And I was in tears, and my dad was just like the most sober I ever have heard him. And he was like, I apologize. That's what I learned. And I
Mm.
was doing what I learned. And he was like, and you're absolutely right, because I don't do that with your little sister. And it took me a long time to learn that. It took me a lot of work to, figure out how to control my temper and how to control the rage. And we had to have a real come to Jesus meeting on the carpet that day. But I was like, I don't want to be this person. And it's the same way in relationships. Like, I watched the stuff that my dad did. And when I saw that behavior coming up for me, when I saw myself raging out, and I could see it in the other person's face. And I'm like, oh my God, I remember, watching my mom look like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to elicit that response from somebody. So I think that and that's what I was going to say. There are definitely markers. There are situations or people that come into our life that allow us to see something different. And then we have a choice. Do I want to keep doing things the same way, or do I choose something different?
Right. And I think, with rage, with anger, with all of that, for a very brief moment when you're experiencing it, it feels very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very honest thing to say.
Yeah.
Extremely angry, when you are in a place to hurt somebody for a split moment, or even in that experience, it makes you feel very powerful. But then at the same time, there is so much fear attached to that, because you don't want somebody to think that you're a monster, because when you come out of that anger, life is supposed to go back normal. And it's not. Like, you've completely disrupted the timeline now. Like, the whole universe has shifted because of what you have done in that moment. And that's a very sobering thought for me, even now. And I won't necessarily say that I'm an angry person, but looking at from where I've come from,
Mm-hmm.
I've hurt a lot of people.
I can definitely relate. So, Gio.
Yeah. So we have thoroughly enjoyed this chat. And we're going to have you on again, Melonee, so we can talk about this writing and highlight, the additional work you're doing, right? You're doing wonderful work teaching. But we definitely want to hear more about this writing, because one of the things that we do regularly is give out journal prompts. And so I would definitely love to invite you to come back and talk to us about, one, what you're writing, two, how and why writing is so important to you, and three, like, how writing has helped you, like what has it done for you, especially with processing a lot of the things that we talked about today, like where, doing the journalistic work that you talked about, and reflecting on the communities and the turmoil that they're in, but also the work that you have coming out very soon that I'm very excited about. So I think that I would like to extend, Malaika and I would like to extend an invitation to have you come back and talk about, the power of writing, what writing has done for you, and what you're working on, because I know it's wonderful and it needs to be shared, and we need to have more conversations about that even.
Okay, well, I'd love to come back soon.
Very soon.
One of the things about chatting with the aunties that happens, it happens in real time. It's not scripted. It's just like chatting with your aunties in real life. You say, I'm just gonna run in here for a minute. I got a couple things I need to say.
Just tell you one more thing.
Right. And so we will continue the conversation. I would like to invite you to close out with a quote from what you're writing, and that will give us some insight into what we'll be talking about the next time that we gather around the table.
Oh, Lord. Okay. All right. So this is from my book chapter from an upcoming book called Blackwashed. And it's a collection of essays, prose, poems, written by Black women who are all in relationship with this young man who lives in Philadelphia, a dear friend of mine, Dennis Dumpson, who is a writer, PR, communications extraordinary, really wonderful person. And he invited all of us because he wanted to talk about his relationships with Black women. And he said, but I can't really talk about that unless I bring in the Black women that have taught me a lot about myself.
Mm.
And so this is an excerpt about my experiences of being blackwashed or washed in the humanity of being a Black woman. I found myself adrift in that ocean, feeling like I had bottomed out of love. My tears meeting the water goddess in me, around me, through me. I knew my love had kept me afloat. It had kept me alive. It made me want to rejoice. My Holy Ghost suspended in the current. What words could I spit forth and praise God? My mother gave God her gratitude. I give God the celebration of my words. I will sow them into the world I create. Bring the stool of your sorrow at the base of the waterfall, but be ready to rise and sing at the altar call of love. God is a woman, and she gives us water when the sky does not fall.
So yeah, that just took me out. um,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing that piece with us. I think that was a beautiful place for us to leave off. For everybody who's joined us, thank you. We honor your time. We appreciate you sticking in, hanging in here with us for a few more minutes. And make sure to check Instagram, the Lux Libra Instagram, Melanie DG Instagram, and Purple Hair and Converse Instagram. And we will make sure to drop all of the links. You will also be able to go back and watch this live or watch the live on YouTube. And we'll have those books that we were talking about. So thank you
Thank
for sending
you.
it out. And we'll be back with you guys next Wednesday and very, very soon with Miss Melody.
Thank y'all for the invitation. I just thank y'all for this space. I appreciate y'all.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Melanie. We love you.
Love
Mwah. Thank
you.
you for chatting with the aunties.
Bye,
Thank you,
y'all.
everybody, for joining us. Bye, y'all. Bye.
Bye.